the Hellcat. No other car has permeated popular culture as much as the supercharged 6.2 Hemi variants of SRT vehicles. The majority of the population are fond of the loud supercharger whine, the burnouts, the 800 horsepower with a warranty. For someone like me, I'm more interested in the mechanics behind it, like the 2.4 liter supercharger spinning at 15,000 RPM to produce 11 pounds of boost. Regardless of which side of the fence you're on, there's a lot to appreciate when it comes to modern day Hemis. What's more interesting here is that this isn't the first earth-shattering Hemi. The Hellcat equivalent of the 1960s was just as impressive, just as overpowered on the street, and an absolute weapon on the track. Without this Hemi, we wouldn't have the Hellcat of today. Welcome to Forgotten Legends. The Hemi engine has a very unique origin. It wasn't initially designed for road cars, but rather fighter planes, specifically the P-47 Thunderbolt. This was Chrysler's first example of a hemispherical combustion chamber design. The engine, designated as the XI-2220, was a 2,500 horsepower V-16 fighter plane engine built for the war effort in the 1940s, but never surpassed the prototype phase. It was a successful proof of concept into the advantage of the hemispherical combustion chamber design, which the lower surface area meant more of the fuel's heat energy stayed in the cylinder where it pressed down on the piston and maximized power output. By 1951, Chrysler would adapt this design into its first production hemispherical combustion engine called the Firepower V8. In comparison to the Oldsmobile and Cadillac V8s, the Firepower's valves were oriented 90 degrees and canted to provide better flow characteristics and larger valves, which in turn made more power. This also came at a cost, with the Firepower heads were significantly heavier and wider, and the heavier valve train limited its high RPM capabilities. This engine would subsequently power the first muscle car, the Chrysler 300, which was named for its 300 horsepower Firepower V8, and it was sold to the public to qualify for NASCAR racing. By 1963, Chrysler's engine division would begin developing an engine purely for racing and timed vehicle acceleration drag events.
In the all-Plymouth go.
They would retain the 426 cubic inch Chrysler block design, but with 3/10 thicker cylinder walls, taller skirts, and a cross-belted main to better support the crankshaft. The cylinder heads maintained the hemispherical chambers in the 58.5 degree angle between the valves, and the ports were opened up significantly to increase airflow and volumetric efficiency. Since NASCAR had a 427 cubic inch maximum engine displacement, Chrysler used a severely over-square bore and stroke configuration, which allowed larger 2¼ inch intake valves, giving it an immense advantage in cylinder airflow. Even the crankshafts were heat treated, shot peened, and nitride hardened, which was soon to be tested in a trial of fire. In the 1964 Daytona 500, Hemi-powered Plymouths finished first, second, and third, led by Richard Petty in his number 43 Plymouth Belvedere.
You've got $30,000 coming to you. Do you have any idea of how it's going to be spent?
Well, it'll go for some more cars, I imagine. Being they run that good, we ought to get a couple more.
In October of that year, NASCAR would ban the 426 Hemi purely due to its dominance by creating a rule that the engines have to be available in production cars. This rule alone would spawn some of the fastest factory muscle cars of the 1960s. In 1966, the A102 426 Hemi would become available in street cars, first being the E-body Plymouth Belvedere and Dodge Charger. These street Hemis differed from the race Hemi since they had slightly lower compression, a milder camshaft grind, cast iron manifolds, and dual plane intake with the twin Carter 4-barrel carbs. Even in neutered street trim, the A102 street Hemis made an SAE gross rating of 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, and it outclassed the majority of big blocks available at the time. Even more impressive is that the street Hemis still maintained the same port design, the same combustion chambers, and the same large 2¼ inch intake valves, making the street Hemi just a cam swap and long tube header away from making north of 500 horsepower like the race Hemis. In fact, the YouTube channel Nick's Garage dynoed a stock 426 Hemi that had factory exhaust manifolds, factory camshaft grind, the factory intake, and only differed with a 30 thousandths overboard to clean up the cylinder walls, and it produced 490 horsepower at the crankshaft, well underrated of its 425 horsepower factory rating. In the Chrysler B-bodies, they were some of the fastest cars around. Even in the April 1966 issue of Car and Driver, a 66 Plymouth Satellite 426 Hemi ran a 13.8 second quarter mile at 103.8 miles per hour. As impressive as it was, the 426 Street Hemi still lugged around the B-body's heavier 4,000-pound curb weight and chassis. It wasn't until the introduction of the wider, shorter, and lighter E-body platform is where the 426 Street Hemi really could shine. The 1970 Challenger was a perfect candidate for the Street Hemi, lighter and more nimble than its Charger big brother, and sized to compete with the pony cars like the Mustang, the Camaro, and the Firebird. The RT trim, which was the performance line of the Challenger, had multiple engine options to choose from: the 383 Wedge, the 440 Magnum and 6-pack, and the most expensive, the 426 Hemi, which was $778 plus the $235 track package you also had to purchase when optioning for the Hemi. This cost a quarter of the original price of the car in just a single engine upgrade. On paper, the 446 pack made 390 horsepower, only 35 horsepower less than the 426 Hemi, and without the drastic price increase and more involved maintenance of the race-developed 426 Hemi, which in turn, the 440 became a more popular choice. All the 426 Hemi did well was go fast in a straight line, and it did this extremely well. Four-speed cars completed the quarter mile in 13.1 seconds at 107 miles per hour, which was almost a full second faster than the 446 pack cars. It was a one-trick pony just like the modern-day Hellcat, but this one trick it was very good at. The Challenger RT Hemi was marketed as part of the Scat Pack. This was Dodge's performance lineup that could run the standing start quarter mile in 14 seconds or quicker, which included the Charger RT, the Coronet RT, the Dart GTS, and later the Coronet-based Super B. From the dealer, you can option Scat packages, which range from cosmetics to full-blown engine performance parts. There were 5 Scat packages, first being the Showboat, which was an engine dress-up kit. Next, the Readout, which included oil and fuel pressure gauges. The Cruncher, which was a higher ring and pinion gear and her shifter. The Believer, which included a high-rise intake manifold, a more aggressive camshaft, and long tube headers. And the ultimate package was the Top Eliminator. This gave the customer the 6-pack intake manifold and triple carbs, an electric fuel pump and heat exchanger, and the 6-pack hood. When uncorked, the 426 Hemi could easily eclipse 500 to 600 horsepower naturally aspirated with the camshaft, intake, and fueling upgrades, putting the Street Hemi back to race Hemi power. The 426 Hemi combo was available in the Challenger for 1970 and 71, and as emissions regulations started to tighten at the tail end of 71, rather than neuter the 426 Hemi further down to lower compression and a wheezing dog of its former glory, Chrysler just discontinued the 426 altogether after 1971. This choice to discontinue solidified the Hemi name in legendary status for decades to come, as there were no gutless 426 Hemis, which couldn't be said for its contemporaries like the GM 454 Big Block. The 1970 Challenger RT 426 Hemi is essentially the spiritual father to the Hellcat. Even with 45 years of separation, they parallel each other extremely well, both being offered with the most powerful engine from the manufacturer at the time, very understated cosmetics which take a keen eye to differentiate from the lower trims. They both are immensely tunable, where the 426 Hemi is a race engine waiting to be uncorked from the factory. The 6.2-liter supercharged Hemi in the Hellcat is a supercharger pulley and tune away from adding 100 horsepower to it. Even in popular culture, the Challenger RT Hemi would see the big screen in the movie Vanishing Point, which takes us on a multi-state high-speed police chase from Colorado to San Francisco. For the Hellcat, it is seen probably in every rap video in the last 5 years and mentioned countless times in lyrics. Without the success of the 426 Hemi Challenger, you wouldn't have the Hellcats and Demons of today, and a world without those to me seems a tad bit boring.